A little over 10 years ago, when I was in my mid-20s, I frequented many conventions in downtown Seattle where we all dressed as heroes, villains, or just plain cute characters from video games, anime, or pop culture. I've been doing this since I was in 9th grade, so I was quite accustomed to Seattle's convention center and its area. I had a lot of experience walking in the day and night while in costume as being dressed as my favorite character, but one day was different. One day, I was shocked to notice myself holding my purse closer and firmer to my body as I walked by a Black man. To say I was disgusted with myself would be an incredible understatement. This man had done nothing but walk beside me for me to react this way. Yes, I had been assaulted on that street while in costume before, but that was by a white man. So why was I clenching my purse now? In my many, many years of therapy from childhood trauma, I had been told that your first thought is what you've been conditioned to think. What you do afterwards shows who you really are. And that's where you have power. I knew my body reacted this way because of what our society had poured into me about the color of his skin, but that to me was unacceptable still. After I healed from the initial shock that came from paying attention to my own reactions, I decided I would never react this way again. I made a deal with myself that every time I walked by a Black man or woman, I would pay attention to my bodily reactions, purposely loosen my whole body, make eye contact, smile, and exchange pleasantries as our paths crossed. I'm sure at first I was quite the sight. I probably looked intoxicated with how limber I made my body feel. I would sometimes even hold my purse and fling it around. I wanted to exude trust, not reservation. To this day, I have continued this practice, and now my initial reaction is to be friendly and not guarded. After all, the people I walk by haven't done anything wrong, no matter their skin color. Years later, when I took classes of DBT, or dialectical behavioral therapy, I learned all this time I'd been doing the hardest DBT skill, and it's called opposite action. This is where you notice how your body is reacting to something and then change it. Sounds easy, right? It's actually the most effective DBT skill to change an emotion or thought, and at the same time, it is by far the hardest. Pay attention to yourself now. Are your shoulders up to your ears? Relax them down. Are your hands clenched? Stretch them. This is the skill in its simplest form, but using it when you're trapped in an ineffective emotional cycle is the real challenge. Seeing the change in yourself, though, makes it worth it. Since then, I have used this skill to change many initial negative thoughts I have about others or myself. I am grateful for my experience practicing and utilizing opposite action, and very, very grateful that I paid attention to my prejudiced reaction of an innocent man walking down the street.
It's the Summer Day by Mary Oliver. Who made the world? Who made the swan and the black bear? Who made the grasshopper? This grasshopper, I mean, the one who has flung herself out of the grass, the one who is eating sugar out of my hand, who is moving her jaws back and forth instead of up and down, who is gazing around with her enormous and complicated eyes. Now she lifts her pale forearms and thoroughly washes her face. Now she snaps her wings open and floats away. I don't know exactly what a prayer is. I do know how to pay attention, how to fall down into the grass how to kneel in the grass, how to be idle and blessed, how to stroll through the fields, which is what I have been doing all day. Tell me, what else should I have done? Doesn't everything die at last and too soon? Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? My mom had a very particular morning habit for many years. Every morning, she would sit in the dark for about an hour, drinking her coffee and smoking cigarettes. There was no television on, she wasn't reading, just her, the dark, the quiet, and the coffee and cigarettes. In comparison, my mornings go something like this generally. I wake up when the dog starts whining, sometime between 5 a.m. and 6:30 if I'm really lucky. And I've gotten up at 3:30 to let him out earlier. I go downstairs and I let him out, and then I sit on the couch with my cat Liam on my feet. I generally play the New York Times puzzles in the morning, usually while on the phone with a friend of mine. We do them together. I glance at the news, maybe I check Facebook. Occasionally I'll pick up my book. And then at 7, I'll feed the geriatric pets on the main floor and the kittens in the basement. I'll go for a walk or read or play with the kittens. The idea of sitting and doing nothing unless I'm trying to sleep isn't something that my brain comprehends. This isn't actually a good thing. Many of us, I imagine, have noticed that our brains are a little fuzzier lately. We may blame it on aging or on our phones, on menopause, on COVID, or just the crazy, overwhelming world we live in that demands our attention all the time. And all of those things play a role. But what would you say if I told you there was a bigger reason? Johann Hari wrote a great book called Stolen Focus: Why You Can't Pay Attention and How to Think Deeply Again. You can tell I read it and liked it. In which he talks about our attention problem. He begins with an anecdote about taking his 15-year-old nephew to Graceland, partly as a way to get him off his phone for a while, which failed miserably. But he also noticed that for the rest of the tourists there and in other places, that the experience of seeing something has taken second place to the experience of documenting seeing something. No one just looks at the Mona Lisa anymore. They just snap a selfie in front of it. And he bemoans the fact that the individual iPads they give you for the self-guided tour seem more interesting to people than Graceland itself. He describes a husband showing his wife how to move the picture on the screen so you can see different sides of the jungle room as they're in the jungle room. Hari talks to experts, primarily social scientists. He's careful to state what seems to be information agreed upon by most scientists or researchers and what is one or two people's opinions or findings. He interviews people around the world. He does his own digital detox, spending 3 months in Provincetown without access to any devices that can access the internet. He talks about having to order a jitterbug phone online, which are designed for very old people. One of the people he talks to, Professor Joel Nigg of Portland, Oregon, is a world-renowned expert on children's attention problems who compares our inability to focus to the rise in obesity. Now, unfortunately, a lot of people tend to think of obesity as an individual problem. You just eat too much and don't exercise enough, and if you just tried harder. But Nigg explains that it's not that in the last 50 years, people have gotten greedy and self-indulgent, but rather that in the last 50 years, our food has changed drastically. The huge rise in ultra-processed foods, the change in city design that discourages walking or biking. It's harder to afford fresh, healthy food, not only from a financial perspective, but from a time perspective. But as long as we tell ourselves it's just an issue of willpower, we don't have to change our systems. The fact that if people who lose significant amount of weight, only 5% keep that weight off for 5 years, that tells me it's not just a problem of willpower. And the problem with making it all about willpower is that people who are trying feels like something is wrong with them. I am bad, I just can't do it. The same thing is happening to our attention. It is not just that smartphones exist and we don't have enough personal willpower to put them down. It is that systems are designed to reduce our attention, to keep us scrolling longer, and to pinpoint our likes and our dislikes and our reactions to reel us in. Hari talked to a guy named Tristan Harris, a former Google engineer who was in a class that actually led to Instagram. Persuasive Technology Lab. The book quotes, "During the last class, they ask, what if in the future you had a profile of every single person on Earth? As a designer, you would track all the information they offer up on social media and build a detailed profile of them. It's not just the simple stuff, their gender or age or interests. This would be a psychological profile, figuring out how their personality works and the best ways to persuade them. It would know if the user was an optimist or a pessimist, if they were open to new experiences or prone to nostalgia. It would figure out dozens of characteristics they have. Think," the class wondered out loud, "how you could target people if you knew this much about them. Think about how you could change them. When a politician or a corporation wants to persuade you, they could pay a social media company to perfectly target their message just for you." It was the birth of an idea. Years later, when it was revealed that the campaign for Donald Trump had paid a company named Cambridge Analytics to do just that, Tristan would think of that final class at Stanford. "This was the class that freaked me out," he told me. "I remember saying, this is horribly concerning." Tristan tried to use this power for good. He tried to create programs that inserted relevant links into articles. So if you read something and you're like, who is that? You could just click a link that would just tell you that fact, and you didn't have to go to another place and go down an internet rabbit hole just to get your question answered. But the monster that was Google was trying in so many different ways to get your attention that Tristan was really worried about this. He tried to get Google to change their ways. He was worried about how many notifications they sent each minute and the effect that that had on customers' abilities to focus. He quit the company and he sent out a slide deck with his findings, and it got passed around from person to person to person. And it was so interesting that Google hired him back with the job title of company ethicist. But every time he had an idea, he'd mostly just hear back how that wouldn't work. Sound familiar? From the book, the more people stared at their phones, the more money these companies made, period. The people in Silicon Valley did not want to design gadgets and websites that would dissolve people's attention spans. They're not the Joker trying to sow chaos and make us dumb. They spend a lot of their own time meditating and doing yoga. They often ban their own kids from using the sites and gadgets they design and send them instead to tech-free Montessori schools. But their business model can only succeed if they take steps to dominate the attention spans of the wider society. It's not their goal any more than ExxonMobil deliberately wants to melt the Arctic, but it's an inescapable effect of their current business model. Tristan joined up with Asa Raskin, the son of the man who invented the Macintosh computer for Steve Jobs. Asa was a brilliant young coder who was excited when he invented the infinite scroll. Some of you will remember that it used to be when you looked at a website, you'd go to the bottom and it would say, do you want to see more? And you'd have to click a button to load more. And now you don't have to click that button anymore because we have infinite scroll and it just keeps loading new things for you. At first, Asa thought that this was a great thing, making it easier to keep going with things you were looking at. But as he realized how many people just keep scrolling, he did the math and he figured out if that keeps people scrolling just 50% longer, it's probably way more than that, but he used that as an average. That means that people are doing extra scrolling for 200,000 lifetimes every day. That is how much more time people are spending scrolling every day, because he made it easier. Hari realizes this is not an individual problem. Corporate interests have harvested our data and targeted things to us so personally that we spend hours every day on our devices. And perhaps even more important, we are constantly interrupted all the time. The average college student is interrupted every 65 seconds. The average office worker, at least every 3 minutes. And perhaps most importantly, when we get interrupted, it can take us 20 minutes to get back to what we were doing. These interruptions are killing us. The most important answer to how to fix this is to stop allowing companies to harvest our data and use it to advertise to us personally. It seems like an impossible ask. But because hope is part of what church is about, I have some examples for you. First is an art piece up in my house. It's an Ursula Le Guin piece, and it says, "We live in capitalism. Its power seems inescapable. But so did the divine right of kings." We live in surveillance capitalism. Its power seems inescapable. But we have solved similar problems before. Hari wants to give us hope, and so he talks about a couple of different things. One of the studies he focuses on involves lead paint, leaded gasoline. In the 1920s through the 1970s, lead was everywhere, paint, gasoline. Do you know why they put lead in gasoline? So they could patent it. And in the same way, refrigerator mothers were blamed for kids with autism. Mothers were told that they were responsible for their children's lead exposure because they weren't dusting their houses enough or washing their children's hands enough. Of course, it was the lead in gasoline being spewed in the air that caused the problems. And once they finally established that, parents fought back and leaded paint and leaded gasoline were abolished. I can assure you, oil and gas companies fought against those regulations too, so maybe we have some hope when it comes to surveillance capitalism. In the midst of this scary report on our lack of focus, Hari does have some practical solutions that can help. None of these are his original ideas, but he cites his sources well. And I will refer you to the book if you want sources. First of all, if you want to regain your attention, minimizing the amount of times you pick up your phone will help. Don't have notifications for Facebook messages. Don't have notifications for emails. Think about keeping your phone away from your bed. Buy a watch so you aren't pulling your phone out to check the time. Sometimes I preach what I need to learn. But most importantly, he says, figure out your why and lean into that. Hari talks about how when he first went to Provincetown for a digital detox and how the first 48 hours were hell. The next 2 weeks were actually pretty good. And then he crashed hard. He learned that in order to focus and relearn to focus, we need to spend some time each day or each week in a flow state, doing something that is challenging but doable. So if you're a rock climber, don't start with Kilimanjaro, but also don't just do the rock wall at your local playground, because in order for it to be a flow state, it has to be challenging and yet manageable. For Hari, that was working on writing his novel every day. He figured out that if he spent 3 hours in focused time writing each morning, that set him up really well for the rest of the day. He also found that without any electronic kinds of devices like that, he had an old, almost bricked word processor, he finally started sleeping 9 hours a night. And he said it was just like the best thing ever. Getting more sleep helps us focus. Eating healthier food helps us focus. Letting kids play outside regularly and have fewer scheduled activities so they have time to make their own mistakes and then learn from them. Other suggestions include the need for fewer hours working and less stress overall in our lives. Did you know that people who work fewer hours are overall more productive than people who work more hours? He also mentions 2 more things that I find to be really important. The first is that it is incredibly difficult to stay on top of the news when we can't focus. And when the administration is bombarding us with horrors and weird statements at every turn. He writes, "I don't think it's a coincidence that this crisis in paying attention has taken place at the same time as the worst crisis of democracy since the 1930s. People who can't focus will be more drawn to simplistic, authoritarian solutions and less likely to see clearly when they fail. A world full of attention-deprived citizens alternating between Twitter and Snapchat will be a world of cascading crises where we can't get a handle on any of them." And the second is what we lose by not reading as much anymore. I don't mean reading as opposed to audiobooks, those are fine, but people who don't read fiction do, in fact, have less empathy than people who read other people's stories. "The medium is the message," said Canadian professor Marshall McLuhan about television in the 1960s. "Sitcoms wrap everything up in 22 minutes. Twitter cuts that down to 280 characters. There is not a lot of time for nuance." But Hari writes, "What I wondered is the message buried in the medium of the printed book. Before the words convey their specific meaning, the medium of the book tells us several things. Firstly, life is complex, and if you want to understand it, you'll have to set aside a fair amount of time to think deeply about it. You need to slow down. Secondly, there is a value in leaving behind your other concerns and narrowing down your attention to one thing, sentence after sentence, page after page. Thirdly, it is worth thinking deeply about how other people live and how their minds work. They have complex inner lives just like you." Conventional wisdom says that many ministers preach the same 2 or 3 sermons over and over again. One of mine is definitely the power of listening to other people's stories. It is important to know that there is hope here. Hope that people can make changes to make the world better. We managed to ban lead. We managed to ban the fluorocarbons in hairspray that were destroying the ozone layer in the 70s and 80s. And hope that some younger people are fighting back against the ubiquity of social media. Vivian, our office manager, went from a smartphone to a flip phone. My daughter Mika just bought something called a Wise phone, a product designed to give you the best and most important aspects of a smartphone without the dopamine rewards. It has a plain black screen with words like text, call, maps, camera, settings. You can use an older Maps GPS application. You can call and text and take nice photos. You can call an Uber or a Lyft or check your bank balance, but you can't connect to the internet. It adds apps one at a time, including one's user's request. So Mika's trying to get her work app installed so she can check in for her job. It allows you to access Spotify and various other necessary applications. But it doesn't allow you to check your email. It's hoping to make you less distracted. And finally, I will leave you with an article about the Reconnect movement. This is a club I read about in the New York Times that has now spread to half a dozen colleges and a few high schools, as well as New York City. Sean Killingsworth, who was attending college at the University of Central Florida, noticed that all of his classmates were sucked into their own devices while waiting for class to start, while having lunch, pretty much everywhere. So he started a club where for an hour, everyone turns in their phones into somebody's backpack and actually talk to one another. It's become popular, though it's sometimes hard for students to talk to each other at the beginning. Students can feel uncomfortable at the start of a meeting, said Mia Schaffner, age 20, the UFC club president. Phones act as a digital pacifier, she says, and her peers tend to scroll when they feel uneasy. But by the end, she added, they get to know each other and realize that talking is not really as difficult as they think it is. It takes some work, especially for a generation that hasn't ever been without screens. But it is so worth it. It is not your fault if it's hard. Giant corporations are literally using your data to make you scroll longer and longer, to personalize your feeds to where you keep getting sucked in. But going deeper is worth it, my friends. In person, by reading books, in playing outside and letting kids be kids. You know that, or you wouldn't be here. It is your one wild and precious life. Make it count. Blessed be, and amen.